Deep in the forgotten archives of Ethelgard lies a truth hidden for centuries. They buried her existence behind stone and iron, terrified of what she was. But they forgot one crucial detail. Stone cannot silence a soul, and an Alpha King never forgets the sound of his true mate's heart. Historical records recovered from the ruined estates of House Smith rarely mention the firstborn daughter. If you look closely at the surviving ledgers from the year 1482, you will see expenditures for a silversmith, heavy iron locks, and an unusual, continuous supply of fresh wolfsbane. They wanted the world to believe Lord Cedric Smith had only one daughter, the beautiful and refined Cordelia. But hidden away in the highest, most desolate tower of Highcliffe Keep was Gwendolen. Gwendolen Smith was a secret kept with violent desperation. To understand why a powerful human lord would imprison his own flesh and blood, you must understand the volatile politics of the era. The Smiths bordered the treacherous northern wilds, a vast expanse of ancient forests ruled by the Lycan court. For decades, a fragile peace treaty had kept the beasts at bay. But treaties require collateral. Gwendolen's mother, a woman named Rowena, had not been a simple human noblewoman. She possessed ancient, dormant blood, the kind that sang to the earth and, more dangerously, to the wolves. When Rowena died under mysterious circumstances, shortly after Gwendolen's birth, Lord Cedric hastily married Lady Vivian, a ruthless political strategist who immediately recognized the danger the infant posed. Gwendolen did not just carry her mother's striking silver-blonde hair. She carried an aura, a scent, and a presence that unsettled the hounds in the kennels and drew wild wolves to the castle walls, howling into the dead of night. To Lady Vivian, Gwendolen was a threat to Cordelia's inheritance and a beacon that could bring the wrath of the Lycan kingdom upon them. So, at the age of 5, Gwendolen was declared dead to the public. In reality, she was dragged up 3 flights of spiraling, windowless stairs to the attic. Her world became a circular stone room. The windows were bricked up, leaving only narrow slits too small for a bird to fly through, yet large enough to let in the biting winter wind. Her daily life was an exercise in silence. Lady Vivian had enforced strict rules. Gwendolen was never to speak above a whisper, never to sing, and never to cry. The room was lined with bundles of dried wolfsbane, replacing the scent of her skin with a suffocating, bitter herbal decay designed to mask her existence from any supernatural predators passing by. For 15 years, Gwendolen lived as a ghost. Her only companions were the dusty tapestries, a meager collection of old books, smuggled by a sympathetic, mute servant named Elias, and the steady, rhythmic thumping of her own heart. Gwendolen always thought her heartbeat was unusually loud. In the dead silence of the night, it echoed in her ears, a deep, resonant drumbeat that felt entirely too powerful for her frail, neglected frame. She did not know that this heartbeat was the hallmark of a true Lycan mate, a physiological beacon designed by nature to call out to her other half. The uneasy peace at Highcliffe Keep shattered in the autumn of her 20th year. The Lycan king of the Northern Pack, Alpha Alistair Vane, had declared a royal tour. Alistair was a legend of brutal efficiency and terrifying power. He had conquered the warring factions of the North and united them under a single, bloody banner. Now, he demanded that the human lords renew their treaties in person. But rumors whispered through the servant halls, which Elias faithfully transcribed onto scraps of parchment for Gwendolen, suggested Alistair was looking for something else. A bride. An anchor to the human world to legitimize his reign over the conquered territories. Lady Vivian saw an opportunity that could elevate House Smith to unprecedented heights. She would offer Cordelia to the Alpha King. Cordelia, who had been trained in etiquette, politics, and seduction, was paraded around the keep as the perfect human queen. The preparations for the Alpha King's arrival were frantic, but for Gwendolen it meant tighter chains. "Double the wolfsbane," Lady Vivian ordered, her voice carrying up the draughty stairwell on the eve of the king's arrival. "Line the door with silver dust. If that beast catches even a whiff of her unnatural blood, he will tear this castle apart to claim her, and Cordelia's future will be ruined." "Do you understand me, Cedric?" "She is secured, Vivian," Lord Cedric replied, his voice heavy with the guilt of a coward. "The tower is sealed. Even an alpha cannot smell through 6 inches of solid oak, silver wards, and poisoned herbs." Trapped in her cold cell, Gwendolen pressed her ear against the heavy oak door. She felt a strange, terrifying flutter in her chest. For the first time in her life, the isolation felt less like a punishment and more like a cage holding her back from a storm she desperately wanted to run into. As the distant horns blew, signaling the arrival of the Lycan King, Gwendolen clutched her chest. Her heart was beating so fiercely it bruised her ribs, an erratic, thunderous rhythm that seemed to echo through the very foundations of the keep. Alpha Alistair Vane rode into the courtyard of Highcliffe Keep, atop a monstrous black destrier, surrounded by 20 of his most lethal elite guards. Even in human form, Alistair was a towering figure of intimidation. His eyes were a piercing, unnatural shade of amber, missing nothing. He moved with a predatory grace that made the heavily armed human guards instinctively back away. Lord Cedric and Lady Vivian stood at the grand entrance, flanked by servants, and an absolutely radiant Cordelia. They bowed deeply as the Alpha King dismounted. "Welcome, King Alistair, to Highcliffe Keep," Cedric proclaimed, his voice trembling slightly. "We are honored to host you and your court." Alistair barely glanced at Cedric. His amber eyes swept over the courtyard, his nose flaring slightly. To the Lycan King, the world was a tapestry of scents and sounds. He could smell the fear sweating out of Cedric's pores, the overwhelming, cloying perfume masking Cordelia's arrogance, and the bitter, sharp sting of wolfsbane that hung heavily in the castle's air. The wolfsbane irritated him. It was an insult, a human defense mechanism that mocked his kind. "Lord Smith," Alistair's voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the stones of the courtyard. "You heavily ward your home against pests. I hope those herbs are not meant for my men." "No, Your Grace," Vivian interjected smoothly, pushing Cordelia slightly forward. "It is merely a precaution against the wild mountain lions. May I present my daughter, Cordelia?" Alistair looked down at Cordelia. She smiled, batting her eyelashes, offering a rehearsed curtsy. The Alpha King felt absolutely nothing. No pull, no spark, no scent of destiny. Just empty human ambition. He gave a curt nod and pushed past them into the great hall. The evening banquet was a lavish, tense affair. The human nobles laughed too loudly, drank too much, and tried desperately to entertain the stoic, unsmiling Lycans. Cordelia sat beside Alistair, pouring his wine and whispering flirtatious promises, none of which breached the cold fortress of the king's mind. Alistair was deeply, painfully restless. His inner wolf was agitated, pacing back and forth within his psyche, scratching at the walls of his control. Something was wrong with this keep. Beneath the overpowering stench of roasted meats, spilled wine, and toxic wolfsbane, there was a void. It was as if a piece of the castle had been deliberately excised from reality. As the night wore on, a violent autumn storm rolled in from the northern wilds. Thunder shook the heavy stained glass windows, and lightning illuminated the great hall. High up in the tower, Gwendolen was curled into a ball on her thin mattress. The storm terrified her, but not as much as the agonizing, burning sensation in her chest. Her heart was hammering against her sternum in a frantic, desperate Morse code. Thump, 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 thump. It was so loud to her own ears that she clamped her hands over them, sobbing quietly into the darkness. She felt an overwhelming pull, a magnetic force dragging her soul toward the floorboards, toward the great hall below. Down at the banquet, Alistair suddenly froze. He raised a hand, and instantly the 20 Lycan guards at the tables went dead silent, their hands dropping to their weapons. The human musicians, noticing the terrifying shift in the room, abruptly stopped playing. The sudden silence was deafening. "Your Grace?" Cordelia asked, her smile faltering. "Is the wine not to your liking?" Alistair ignored her. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping violently against the stone floor. His amber eyes had dilated, the black pupils consuming the gold. His chest heaved. Through the cacophony of the storm, through the layers of thick stone, wood, and the interference of the silver wards, Alistair's supernatural hearing caught something impossible. It was faint at first, a rhythmic vibration, thump, thump. His wolf went absolutely feral, howling within his mind, thrashing against his ribs. It was a heartbeat. But not just any heartbeat. It was the ancestral cadence of a pure mate, a sound he had searched for across continents, a sound his biology demanded he protect at all costs. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. "Who is in the walls?" Alistair growled, his voice dropping into a demonic, dual-toned timbre that made several human nobles faint on the spot. I assure you, no one, my king," Cedric stammered, going pale. Alistair did not wait for an explanation. He vaulted over the high table, shattering the oak with his boots, and stalked toward the grand staircase. The heavy scent of wolfsbane grew stronger the higher he went, burning his nasal passages. But he didn't care. The heartbeat was pulling him like a physical chain around his neck. Lady Vivian screamed, abandoning her decorum. "Stop him! He cannot go up there! The restricted wing!" The human guards drew their swords, stepping in front of the stairwell. Alistair didn't even slow down. His elite guard surged forward, disarming the humans in seconds, tossing them aside like rag dolls. Alistair took the stairs 3 at a time. Second floor, third floor. The heartbeat grew louder, more frantic. It smelled of terror, of isolation, and beneath the toxic layers of burning wolfsbane, he finally caught the faintest hint of rain, wild honey, and ancient magic. He reached the end of the corridor. A heavy iron door, dusted heavily in silver, and bolted with 3 massive deadlocks, blocked his path. The silver burned the air, designed to weaken any Lycan who came near. "Open it," Alistair commanded. Lord Cedric, having chased the king up the stairs with Vivian and Cordelia in tow, fell to his knees. "My king, you do not understand. There is a monster in there. A cursed thing." Alistair turned, his face half-shifted, fangs elongated, claws ripping through his leather gloves. "If you do not produce the key in 3 seconds, Lord Smith, I will rip your spine from your throat and use it to pick the lock." Cedric fumbled for his keys, weeping, but his hands shook too much. Disgusted, Alistair turned back to the door. Ignoring the searing pain as the silver dust burned into his skin, he drove his fist into the solid oak. The wood splintered. He gripped the iron deadbolts with bare hands, roaring as the silver scorched his flesh and ripped the metal straight out of the stone frame. The door crashed inward, throwing up a cloud of dust and dried wolfsbane. Alistair stepped into the freezing, dark room. In the corner, chained to the wall by a thin silver shackle, was a girl. She was dressed in rags, her silver blonde hair tangled and wild, covering her face. She was trembling violently, her hands pressed over her heart, as if trying to keep it from leaping out of her chest. Alistair fell to his knees. The brutal, terrifying Alpha King crawled across the dirty floor, completely ignoring the humans watching in horror from the doorway. He reached out a trembling, bloodied hand and gently pushed the tangled hair from her face. Gwendolen gasped, looking up into eyes of burning gold. The moment their eyes met, the chaotic pounding in her chest instantly synchronized with his. "Mate," Alistair breathed, the word a sacred vow, a prayer finally answered. "Get away from her!" Lady Vivian shrieked from the hall, stepping forward with a crossbow aimed directly at Gwendolen. "She is an abomination. Her mother was a witch who cursed our bloodline, and she is meant to rot in this tower. If you take her, Alistair Vane, the treaty is broken, and I will see her dead before she puts a crown on her head." Alistair slowly rose to his feet, shielding Gwendolen with his massive body. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. He didn't just look like a king. He looked like a god of war about to unleash Armageddon. "The treaty," Alistair snarled softly, his voice echoing with absolute finality, "was broken the moment you put my queen in chains." Lady Vivian's hands did not tremble as she levelled the heavy iron crossbow at Gwendolen's chest. The weapon was loaded with a quarrels forged of pure, blessed silver, lethal to any lichen, and certainly deadly enough to pierce the fragile heart of the half-blood girl chained to the wall. "I said, step away from her, beast," Vivian hissed, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate frenzy. Cordelia whimpered from the hallway, shrinking behind her father, Lord Cedric, who looked as though he might collapse from sheer terror. Alistair did not move away. Instead, he rose to his full, towering height, deliberately placing his massive armoured chest directly in the path of the crossbow. His golden eyes locked onto Vivian with a cold, predatory emptiness that promised a slow and agonizing demise. "You aim a weapon at my queen." Alistair's voice was a low, guttural vibration that rattled the loose stones in the tower walls. "You have already forfeited your life, human. The only question now is how much you will suffer before I end it." Vivian's finger twitched on the trigger. "Shoot him!" she screamed at the remaining human guards who had dared to creep up the stairs. "Shoot the monster!" The thwack of the heavy bowstring echoed like a thunderclap in the confined space. The silver bolt flew with lethal precision, but Alistair was faster than human comprehension. He did not dodge. He simply shifted his stance, absorbing the brutal impact. The silver bolt buried itself deep into his left shoulder, tearing through leather, muscle, and sinew. The smell of burning flesh instantly filled the air as the silver reacted with his lichen blood, a searing, white-hot agony that would have dropped a lesser man to his knees. Alistair did not even flinch. He slowly reached up with his right hand, gripped the bloody, smoking shaft of the bolt, and ripped it from his own flesh with a sickening, tearing sound. He tossed the bloody silver to the stone floor, where it clattered harmlessly. "My turn," Alistair whispered. Before Vivian could even draw a breath to scream, Alistair crossed the room. He bypassed the guards entirely, his hand snapping out to wrap around Vivian's throat. He lifted her off the floor effortlessly, her legs kicking frantically in the air, the crossbow dropping from her useless grip. "Please," Lord Cedric sobbed, falling to his knees. "Mercy, your grace, she is my wife." Alistair threw Vivian against the stone wall with a bone-rattling crunch. She slumped to the floor, gasping for air, thoroughly incapacitated, but alive. "Death is too quick for what she has done," Alistair snarled, turning his back on the pathetic lord of the keep. He knelt back down beside Gwendolen. She was staring at him, her chest heaving, her silver blonde hair framing a face pale from years of darkness. She reached out a hesitant, trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the bleeding wound on his shoulder. "You are hurt," Gwendolen whispered. It was the first time she had spoken aloud in a decade. Her voice was raw, raspy. Yet to Alistair, it was the most beautiful melody he had ever heard. "A scratch, little bird," Alistair murmured, his rough, blood-stained hands reaching for the thick silver cuff around her ankle. The metal hissed and burned his skin as he gripped it. But he closed his eyes, let out a deep, rumbling growl, and shattered the solid silver with his bare hands. Gwendolen collapsed forward into his chest. The moment her skin touched his, a jolt of pure, crackling electricity surged through them both. For Gwendolen, the agonizingly loud, frantic beating of her heart finally found its echo. The violent storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by the steady, rhythmic drum of Alistair's heartbeat, perfectly syncing with her own. Alistair scooped her into his arms, standing up and holding her tight against his chest. She weighed nothing to him, a tragic testament to her years of starvation. He wrapped his heavy, fur-lined cloak around her trembling shoulders, shielding her from the cold and the horrific gaze of her family. "Conrad!" Alistair roared. His second-in-command, a massive lichen with scars crossing his jaw, pushed past the terrified human guards and entered the room. "My king!" "Burn the wolfsbane! Arrest Lord Cedric and his family!" Alistair commanded, his eyes fixed purely on the fragile woman in his arms. "We are leaving." But as Alistair carried Gwendolen down the winding, draughty stairs, a sudden, piercing horn blasted through the night air. It wasn't a lichen horn. It was a military clarion call. According to the recovered private journals of Lord Harrison, a prominent noble who survived that night, the true depths of Lady Vivian's treachery were only revealed in the courtyard. She had never intended for the Lichen King to leave Highcliffe Keep alive. The marriage proposal had been a brilliantly constructed trap. As Alistair stepped out of the great hall and into the torrential rain of the courtyard, he stopped dead. The 20 elite Lichen guards were backing up, forming a tight defensive circle around their king. Surrounding them, pouring through the iron gates of the keep, were over 500 heavily armed soldiers of the Silver Vanguard, a mercenary army explicitly trained in the hunting and eradication of supernatural beings. At their head rode General Montgomery, a ruthless tactician clad in steel armor inlaid with silver filigree. "King Alistair Vane!" General Montgomery called out, his voice carrying over the pouring rain. "By the decree of the Human Coalition, your presence here is deemed an act of war. You have violated the borders, and now you will pay the price. Surrender the beast you carry, and your death will be swift." Alistair tightened his grip on Gwendolen. "The only blood that will water this courtyard tonight, Montgomery, is yours." The battle erupted with devastating ferocity. "Fire!" Montgomery bellowed. A volley of silver-tipped arrows blackened the sky, raining down upon the lichens. Alistair spun, sheltering Gwendolen entirely beneath his armored body as arrows shattered against the cobblestones and buried themselves into his cloak. The lichen guards roared, shifting instantly into their monstrous, 10-foot-tall wolf forms. They tore into the vanguard lines, claws ripping through steel plate armor like parchment, their jaws crushing helmets and bone alike. But the Silver Vanguard was prepared. They threw heavy nets woven with silver wire, pinning down the massive wolves. Soldiers moved in with long pikes, stabbing at the trapped lichens. Alistair set Gwendolen down behind a massive stone pillar near the keep's entrance. "Do not move," he ordered, his eyes glowing with a terrifying absolute dominance. "I will return for you." He turned and let his beast take over. The transformation was violent and instantaneous. Alistair exploded out of his armor, shifting into an apex predator. a wolf the size of a war horse, covered in pitch-black fur, his jaws dripping with malice. He launched himself into the fray, moving with the speed of a shadow, tearing through Montgomery's front lines. Every swipe of his massive claws sent armored men flying through the air. Gwendolen huddled behind the pillar, clutching the heavy fur cloak around herself. The noise was deafening, the clash of steel, the agonized screams of men, and the enraged, pain-filled roars of the lichens burning beneath silver nets. She watched, paralyzed by fear, as the tide of the battle slowly turned. There were simply too many humans. 5 vanguard soldiers managed to launch a heavy, barbed silver chain that wrapped around Alistair's hind legs, bringing the Alpha King crashing down into the mud. 10 more men rushed forward with silver-tipped spears, plunging them toward his flanks. Alistair roared in agony, fighting frantically, snapping a spear shaft in his jaws, but the silver was acting like poison, sapping his legendary strength. Gwendolen felt his pain. It was a physical tearing sensation in her own chest. Her breath hitched. The frantic, desperate rhythm of her heart returned, but this time it was not beating in terror. It was beating in absolute, unadulterated fury. Thump, 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 thump. She remembered her mother's blood. Lady Vivienne had called it an abomination, a curse. But as Gwendolen watched her mate, the only creature in her entire life who had ever shown her an ounce of mercy, bleeding in the mud, she realized her blood was not a curse. It was an inheritance. Gwendolen stepped out from behind the pillar and walked into the torrential rain. "Gwendolen, no!" Alistair roared through his wolf's throat, struggling violently against the chains. She did not stop. She walked directly into the center of the slaughter. Her bare feet splashed in the mixture of mud and blood. The freezing rain plastered her thin nightgown to her frail body, but she did not feel the cold. The drumbeat in her chest was so loud now that it seemed to vibrate the very water falling from the sky. General Montgomery noticed her. "Kill the witch!" he screamed, pointing his sword at her. 3 soldiers broke from the line, charging at Gwendolen with raised swords. Gwendolen stopped it. She closed her eyes, placed her hands flat against her chest, right over her wildly beating heart, and drew in a massive, shuddering breath. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer a pale, human blue. They were burning, incandescent silver. She opened her mouth and screamed. It was not a human sound. It was an ancient, resonant, soul-shattering howl that carried the weight of the earth and the fury of the storm. The sound wave hit the charging soldiers like a physical battering ram, throwing them backward through the air. The howl echoed out of the courtyard, rolling across the valleys, piercing the tree line of the northern wilds. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The rain seemed to freeze in the air. From the dense, black shadows of the tree line surrounding Highcliffe Keep, a low, terrifying rumble answered her. It was not the howl of 20 lichens. It was the howl of 10,000. The true army of the north had heard their queen. A tidal wave of massive, feral wolves poured over the stone walls of the keep like a flood of dark water. They did not attack as soldiers. They attacked as an overwhelming force of nature. They swarmed the silver vanguard, ripping the silver nets from Alistair and his elite guard, tearing Montgomery's forces to absolute shreds in a matter of minutes. General Montgomery tried to flee, spurring his horse toward the gates, but Alistair, now freed and furious, intercepted him. With one swipe of his massive paw, the Alpha King decapitated the general, sending his silver-helmeted head rolling across the bloody cobblestones. Silence descended upon the courtyard, save for the heavy panting of thousands of wolves and the gentle patter of the fading rain. The entire lichen army, thousands of massive blood-soaked beasts, turned their glowing eyes toward the frail, soaking wet girl standing in the center of the courtyard. As one, they lowered their massive heads, bowing to the earth in absolute submission to the pure-blooded queen who had just called them to war. Alistair shifted back into his human form, ignoring the deep, bleeding silver burns across his chest and legs. He walked slowly toward Gwendolen, falling to his knees before her in the mud. He took her small, cold hands in his large, warm ones, pressing his forehead against her palms. "My queen," Alistair rumbled, his voice thick with devotion and awe. "You are safe now. I swear upon my soul, no cage will ever hold you again." Gwendolen looked down at the fearsome Alpha King, then out at the army of beasts that had answered the cry of her heart. For the first time in 20 years, she smiled. She pulled Alistair up by his hands, standing tall as the undisputed sovereign of the northern wilds. The girl in the stone cage was dead. The Wolf Queen had awakened. The truth of Gwendolen and Alistair's love proves that destiny cannot be chained. If you were captivated by this epic tale of dark romance, royal betrayal, and an alpha's unbreakable devotion, hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking historical fantasy dramas and untold legends. Your support truly helps us bring more magical worlds to life.